Can you hear me now? Folks, we're going to be starting the next panel, so if you could all take your seats. Thank you very much.
How are you? Good to see you. You too. Everything's well? Oh, you're on the mic. Yeah, it's great. You're retired? Any particular seat? Any particular seat?
Good morning. I'm Julie Hutchison, MassDEP, Marine Oil Spill Prevention and Response Coordinator. I took over for Rich Packard, so I was left in great shape. This talk is going to be basically, how did it start? State, local, federal partners, where did they come from? How did they work? What part of the spill and incident command, et cetera, did they take? And we're going to start with Rich. I don't like to say how many years we were all doing whatever we were doing. 3 gentlemen actually were there. The picture shows Mr. Lehmann, Rich Packard, and Bob Donovan, as we talked about, in incident command. Mr. Lehmann, Steve, the NOAA coordinator, does not look very happy. He really doesn't. We don't know what was being discussed. And in the corner on the lower portion of the screen is Chief Francis, who was so important as our local partner and contributor. So with that, I'd like Rich to come up, and he's going to tell us, he's going to be looking at the state level of how this went, lessons learned, etc. Rich, you're on, and I have the timer.
Okay, all right.
I'm sitting over here with the timer.
Okay, do I do my own slides here?
Yeah, they have I think you might have to face this way, because
Oh.
they're gonna change. There you go. How did you do that? You know how you did
Yeah,
that?
I somehow worked out this technology here. All right. Well, it's good to see you all. It's nice to be here and talking about oil spills, and there isn't an oil spill. That's really a good thing. It's nice to see some familiar faces. How you doing, Pat? And I've been retired, so I haven't been thinking about oil spills for a long time. But I did think about this one, and I do think about it every now and then. You've already heard a pretty good synopsis from Gary Moran on what happened that day. I'm just going to give you a little bit of my personal perspective. I was, as Millie has said and Julie has said, I was the emergency response section chief in the southeast region of DEP at the time. On this April 27th day, it was a Sunday. I remember it well. Sunday, I had spent the weekend in Pennsylvania at a Civil War reenactment. And I was driving home with a bunch of people. It was probably 10 o'clock at night. We were coming through Rhode Island, and my pager went off. Yeah, we had pagers back then. There were no smartphones. I think we didn't have bag phones. We had these little stick phones. And I got information from the DEP on-call person who worked for me at the time, and he told me that the Coast Guard was calling, and they wanted to talk to DEP. And so he gave me the number, and I looked at the number, and I recognized the number was the Coast Guard. I believe at the time you hadn't gone to sectors. It was still MSO Providence. And I recognized the numbers, MSO Providence, that's their number. So I call that number, 10 o'clock Sunday night, and Captain Mary Landry answers the phone. And I'm thinking to myself, she's in the office at 10 o'clock at night. That's a kind of unusual. So this is what she told me at the time. Information, as you probably might imagine, during the early stages of an oil spill, you don't get a lot of good information. But we knew that the tug Evening Tide and the barge B-120 had grounded near the entrance to Buzzards Bay. It had about 4 million gallons of heavy, thick black oil that was heading toward the power plant in Sandwich. And we didn't know how much had been released, but there was oil in the water. That's what everyone knew. And at the time, the Coast Guard had given direction to the tug and barge to transit through Buzzards Bay and go to this anchorage point here. So that's what they had done. That was probably 10 or 12 miles, and oil had been released all through that whole way. So Captain Landry tells me that, we're standing up a command post, as you heard already, at Mass Military Reservation, which I guess now is the Joint Base Cape Cod. And it was at the Coast Guard base. And so that's where we went in the middle of the night, started making phone calls and getting the organizational structure pulled together. So 6 oil is in the water. That's kind of what it looks like. Thick black oil sticks together, coats whatever it touches. It's not easy to get off. It's sticky. And over time, the amount of shoreline that was oiled was identified. And here you can see a map that was generated that shows that about 90-something miles of shoreline were oiled. Different intensities. Some areas like, well, if that doesn't work. Some areas were heavily oiled. This is Westport, Portsmouth Beach, Dartmouth. That was a heavily oiled area. The area around Sconnecut Neck and West Island. Right here, as you've already. I don't know if that wants to do anything. Look at that, it works down there. Doesn't want to do it over there. That's technology for you. Okay, so anyway, there are some areas that were more heavily oiled than others. A lot of that area, maybe, especially up into the Falmouth and the Wareham onset area, wasn't extremely oiled. Yeah, that's that. There you go. Thank you, whoever's doing that. that area wasn't heavily oiled. So we eventually, it took a while, but we eventually figured out how much, where the oil was. The 15 section response teams went out, walked shorelines, did shoreline reconnaissance, and identified where those areas were. And as you heard from Gary, upwards to 500 or 600 people eventually formed that unified command and started doing this cleanup. Here's some oil coming ashore in Dartmouth at Barney's Joy. This was more of a sandy beach, probably a little easier to clean up. The oil didn't penetrate the sand as deeply, so it could be scooped up relatively easily. This is some of the puddles that you'd see on a sandy beach. This is probably, again, in the Dartmouth area. Then there were some beaches that were more rocky and cobbly. Those were a little bit more difficult to clean. Took longer time. The oil tends to penetrate the sediments here. Those cobbles are not easy to clean. As I mentioned, the 6-oil is relatively hard to get off those rocks. There's some larger boulder areas. One of the techniques that was used, Brian reminded me of this, so I'm going to tell this little story now. That I don't know if this was your idea, Steve. But these rocks, are you know, they're difficult to clean. It takes a long time. The 6-oil doesn't want to come off, and so you do the best you can. You know, sometimes you try. We tried many different things. We tried cold water. We tried hot water. We tried some surface washing techniques and things like that. But some of the more difficult areas, one of the last things, you know, Mother Nature can sometimes do a good job of being abrasive, and the weathering and the forces of nature can wear off those fine little particles of oil that are left on the rocks. But in order to help that, there was this technique called, I don't know, subsurface relocation. Is that what they call it? where you would take some of those smaller cobbles, wipe them off with an absorbent pad, and throw them into the beneath the intertidal area, so they're in the water, and you basically can't see them. And we called it, the cleanup people called it wipe and toss. And there were people actually wiping rocks and tossing them into the water. That was one of the techniques that was used here. So there's, we'll go backwards here. So anyway, there's some couple more. This is a beach, I think, in Fairhaven, more along the rack line at the upper end of the intertidal, probably a little easier to clean, and some of the cleanup crews came from all over the country. We had some people from Louisiana, down in Texas. Those folks, you know, they routinely clean up some oil. The Gulf of Mexico has a lot of rigs, and of course they had the Deepwater Horizon, and you know, they have their tolerance for oil is a little bit higher down there than it is up here. So they were sort of surprised, is a good way of putting it, at what we wanted to have cleaned. We heard from wildlife impacts. 1 minute? Okay, I'm almost done. Wildlife impacts, you heard a lot of that already, so I won't go into that. That's my timer? Okay. I'm getting the hook here. So anyway, this shows some shellfish closures. We heard about the public, we heard about the wildlife already, so I won't go into that, but I did want to say that oil spills generate a lot of public interest. A lot of public officials, a lot of media. At the time, Mitt Romney was the governor, so he came down and held a press conference. The gentleman next to him is Bob Donovan. Couldn't make it here today, but he was the state's on-scene coordinator. I was his deputy. That's the admiral from District 1. I don't know. Who is it? Vivian Craig. There you go. Thank you. So anyway, the public, as Mark mentioned, with the volunteer coordinating thing, public involvement and the public's sort of outrage about oil spills is very, very well felt, and they want to be involved. So this is just a summary of the spill impacts. I won't go over it a lot because you've heard about it several times already. This is just a quick of the response structure of how an oil spill, how that organization is pulled together with a federal representative, a state representative, and the responsible parties, folks, or a spill management team. I think the one comment I wanted to make about this is that a big part of spill response and trying to make a coordinated effort is bringing in the local cities and towns. We had 15 cities and towns along Buzzards Bay that were part of this. You don't see them represented here, but they were an important part of this organization and this response. and bringing them in. They wanted to know information. They wanted to be part of the response. So folding them into the response and doing that in a efficient and coordinated way was very important and something we worked on a lot. This is the actual command post. After a couple of weeks, we left Joint Base Cape Cod, and we went here to the Maritime Academy. And this is in the library, not the new library, but the old library. And it looks like controlled chaos. It was, but we got a lot done, and technology was sort of just evolving at that point. GPS and GRPs were a new thing back then, and so we were trying to incorporate that into the response at the same time. So all I want to say about this is after a couple of months, the federal standards for cleanup were met, and the Coast Guard and NOAA said, we're pretty much happy with where we got this. But in Massachusetts, we had our own set of state regulations for cleanup of oil or hazardous materials into the environment. They are called the Mass Contingency Plan. And in a very general way, they say that the cleanup has to be complete. It's not complete until there is no significant risk to these 4 areas. So the spill actually continued. The spill assessment and cleanup continued for the next 6 years, basically. Most of the cleanup was done in the next year, but there were a few areas where it took a good 6 years to get to that final cleanup endpoint, which happened in 2009. So I'm not going to talk about this, but I just, because the follow-up panel is going to talk about it, but I did want to say that not a lot of good things come out of oil spills, but as Mark mentioned, this was one of the better things that came out of the state laws were updated. Mass General Law, Chapter 21E was created, and some of the protections that law put into place is, in my opinion, is one of the main reasons why we are here today and we have not had, in the past 20 years, another major oil spill in Buzzards Bay. Yeah, exactly. So quickly, lessons learned. Communication, as I think Mark mentioned, a couple other people mentioned, was one of my lessons learned. We had some protocols in place to notify cities and towns. I think it was actually Captain Pringle who mentioned it. It was one of the Coast Guard's lessons learned also. We had protocols in place to make those notifications, and we worked them internally, and we worked them through MEMA, because MEMA has those same things that they can get a hold of cities and towns during hurricanes and storms and stuff. And still, the communications didn't work perfectly. So that's always going to be an issue, I think. And cleanup endpoints were the other takeaway for me personally that I noticed. As I mentioned to you, the state regulatory structure has some endpoints in place of how clean is clean, but those don't always match with what the public's expectations are. And that is always a difficult thing to manage during an oil spill. I think in general, the public's expectation is there was no oil here before this spill, and there should be no oil here after this spill. But that isn't always the case. As the wipe and toss example shows you, that sometimes there are tiny little specks of oil that maybe they don't pose a risk to public health and the environment, but they're still there. So anyway, those are my comments. Sorry. Sorry about that.
Oh, here's the schedule. I don't want to look at the time. Next up, Rich was the state piece of it. I'm going to bring up Steve Lehmann from the federal look of how everyone coordinates or doesn't coordinate. Steve was our state on scene coordinator. Sorry, NOAA scientific support coordinator. Such a key to any spill. Steve's been with the SSC since 1990. recently retired. They've all retired. Should have said that. Am I done?
Your time's up.
Sorry about that, guys. Obviously, I don't know how to use that feature. I'll just watch the clock from now on. Steve was a state scientific support coordinator from 1990. Steve's had quite the career from the Exxon Valdez to Deepwater Horizon. I mean, really large spills that we've all heard about, but I think it would be fantastic to be able to work on them. That's another conference. But I want to introduce Steve as his assistants on B-120, can tell us how that coordinated, what his role was, what he learned, all of that stuff. You ready? Yeah. It's 8 minutes.
My slides don't address that, but that's okay.
It's 8 minutes. I'm putting the clock on.
You have there's a slide clicker here. Okay. Thank you, Julie and MassDEP, and I'm honored to be part of the senior citizen panel that's here. All of us retired. It's great to look out and see a bunch of old faces that are actually getting fairly old. And so really quickly, my role as scientific support coordinator and the SSCs around the country are to provide objective science to the Federal On-Scene Coordinator and the Unified Command. We are if the captain is Captain Kirk, we are Mr. Spock. I mean, that is kind of our role, is that we have, well, I was asked one time what authority we had, and I said that I had I had full authority over my dog, some limited authority over my son, and it ended there. So we had no authority, but we had an exceptional team with a tremendous amount of experience. As Julie said, I've had in my career, I've worked spills on every coast and internationally, from the Middle